Welcome back to our news bulletin. Latin America is still the epicenter of COVID-19 as Brazil recorded 1,141 deaths and Mexico reported 736 overnight. The Brazilian Health Ministry says more than 39,000 new cases were recorded in the past 24 hours. Globally, the death toll has exceeded 488,000, while the cases have crossed 9.5 million. Further details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has been raging in LATAM as the region reported the highest number of daily deaths and cases. Mexico pushed past 25,000 deaths and 200,000 confirmed cases, while in the US, the death toll has crossed 154,000 with nearly 40,000 cases reported overnight. The governor of Arizona urged the state's residents to wear masks but stopped short of issuing any new order.
Our time of getting hit is right now, June, July, and August. I don't necessarily like to put these terms on what's happening here, but these are common terms that are being used around the country. This is Arizona's first wave, and this will not be our last wave.
The death toll in Africa has crossed 8,800 with more than 337,000 infections. Meanwhile, the chief of the World Health Organization says the pandemic is subsiding in Europe but getting worse globally.
The situation in Europe has improved. Globally, it's still getting worse. In the first month of this outbreak, less than 10,000 cases were reported to WHO. In the last month, almost 4 million cases have been reported. We expect to reach a total of 10 million cases and 500,000 deaths within the next week.
Elsewhere, China has recorded a further decline in new cases with 13 infections in the past day. 11 were reported in Beijing, where mass testing has been carried out following an outbreak that appears to have been largely brought under control.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 59 people have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to nearly 4,000. The Health Ministry said the number of overnight cases declined to 2,775 from yesterday's 4,000. The ministry said the country's infections tally now stands at nearly 196,000. It said over 2,800 people recovered from the virus in the past day, raising the tally to more than 84,000. The ministry said over 107,000 cases are active in the country. It said 2,765 patients are in critical condition. Now, in other news, Pakistan has called on the international community to hold India accountable for its human rights abuses in occupied Kashmir. In a series of tweets on the International Day in support of victims of torture, Prime Minister Imran Khan said women, men and children have faced pellet guns, sexual assault and electrocution in the occupied valley. Khan said Indian forces' atrocities are well documented by the UN, human rights organizations and international data. He said a continuing silence in the face of India's abuses is against international rights, humanitarian laws and must be unacceptable. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India's lies over a cut in High Commission staff are another diversion.
I mean, baseless. So it's just to divert attention. They have no answers, for the battering that they got in Ladakh, and to quell the domestic dissent, they want to refocus from line of actual control to line of control.
Qureshi also warned India of immediate retaliation in case of any misadventure. Now, Indian troops have martyred 3 more Kashmiris, raising the toll for this month to 43. The civilians were killed during a cordon and search operation in Pulwama district. Police said the operation was underway in Chiwa Ullad village of the Taral area. Indian atrocities in the occupied valley have sharply increased despite the COVID-19 outbreak. The region has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 327 days. The Taliban have released 20 Afghan soldiers and police officers as part of a prisoner swap under the Doha peace deal. In a tweet, the group spokesman Suhail Shaheen said they released detainees in Helmand province. The spokesman said the group gave the freed men some money as transportation fare. The prisoner exchange is part of a February deal which the US had signed with the Taliban in Qatar. The agreement requires Afghan authorities to set free nearly 5,000 Taliban fighters and 1,000 government soldiers. Meanwhile, Kabul's ambassador to Pakistan, Shukrullah Atif Mashal, called on Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa and discussed the Afghan peace process. Iraqi security forces have raided a headquarters belonging to a powerful Iran-backed militia in southern Baghdad. They detained more than a dozen members of Kataib HEZBOLLAH. The raid was the most brazen action by Iraqi forces against the militant group in years. The paramilitary forces said those detained were transferred to the security branch of the Popular Mobilization Forces. But a government official denied any such transfer and said they were still in the custody of other security services. The raid follows a pledge made by the Iraqi government to the US to take tough action against militia that have targeted US installations. US Democrats in the House of Representatives have signed a letter to Israeli leaders warning them against the plan to annex the occupied West Bank. The letter says Tel Aviv's plan will push the parties away from peace talks and the possibility of a final negotiated agreement. The letter warns the unilateral move will upend Israel's ties with its Arab neighbors and Europe. 191 of the chamber's 233 Democrats have signed the letter. Earlier, Israel announced plans to formally annex the Jordan Valley and the West Bank settlements, which it has occupied since 1967. In response, the Palestinian Authority has abolished bilateral agreements with Israel. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says UAE and Tel Aviv have decided to cooperate in the fight against coronavirus. The cooperation comes at a time of strong Arab opposition to Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. In a speech, Netanyahu said the agreement stemmed from intensive contacts with Abu Dhabi over recent months. He said both countries will collaborate in research, development and technology to improve the well-being of the entire region.
This cooperation will be in research and technology development in areas that will improve the health security of the entire region. These are the results of continuous and intensive communications that took place over the past months. This will bring a blessing to many in our region.
Earlier in May, Abu Dhabi-based Etihad made the first known flight by UAE carrier to Israel carrying coronavirus-related aid for Palestinians. Now, the US has blacklisted 4 steel, aluminium and iron companies operating in Iran's metals sector. In a statement, the Treasury Department said Washington has also imposed sanctions on sales agents of Tehran's largest steel company. It said the sales agents generate tens of millions of dollars for Iran's metals industry. The sanctions freeze any US assets held by the companies and prohibit Americans from dealing with them. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Iran continues to use profits from metals manufacturers to fund destabilizing behavior around the world. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have spiked since the US unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. The US Senate has unanimously approved a bill that will lay out sanctions on Chinese officials who undermine Hong Kong's autonomy. The measure also includes secondary sanctions on banks that do business with anyone found to be backing any crackdown on the territory's autonomy. To become a law, it must also pass the House of Representatives and be signed by President Donald Trump. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen said the legislation will send a clear message to Beijing. The vote comes as China presses forward with a security law that will enforce punishment over subversion in Hong Kong. US-China relations have reached their lowest point in years since the coronavirus pandemic. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the US and the European Union need a shared understanding of China to resist it. Virtually addressing an event, Pompeo called Beijing a threat and accused it of stealing European know-how to develop its economy. Pompeo said he had accepted a proposal by EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell to create a formal US-EU dialogue on China. The Secretary of State added he will travel to Europe soon to host the first session. He said he hoped his upcoming conversations with EU leaders on the issue will provide a catalyst for action. Earlier on Monday, the EU held talks with the Chinese leadership. US President Donald Trump's administration has asked the Supreme Court to invalidate the Affordable Care Act. The law enabled millions of Americans to get insurance coverage and remains in effect despite the pending legal challenge. In a filing, government advocate Noel Francisco argued Obamacare became invalid after the previous Republican-led Congress axed parts of it. He said the act cannot survive once the individual mandate, the guaranteed issue, and community rating provisions are invalidated. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump's campaign to rip away the ACA during a pandemic is an act of unfathomable cruelty. Former Vice President Joe Biden also dubbed the move cruel, heartless, and callous. The justices will hear arguments in the case sometime next term, although it is unclear if they will occur before the November election. We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. Russia says Ukraine remains unwilling to find a comprehensive resolution of the Donbas conflict. This comes after the meeting of the political subgroup of the Contact Group for the Settlement in Ukraine. Russia's envoy to the group, Boris Gryzlov, said the session focused on the Donbas conflict regulation and the ceasefire control measures. He said Ukraine is once again stalling the approval of necessary decisions. The envoy said it seems that the main goal of Kiev is to maintain anti-Russian sanctions under any pretense. He said Moscow has reiterated its stance under the Minsk agreements to make the special status for Donbas permanent. Sixteen people have been killed in two separate armed attacks in Mexico's western state of Sinaloa. The state officials said both gunfights took place in the violence-plagued region controlled by drug lord El Chapo Guzman. Security forces say they found the bodies of 7 alleged cartel hitmen on a dirt road next to a bullet-riddled pickup truck in Bagricitos. The other shootout took place in a nearby small town, resulting in another 9 fatalities. Officials said 7 of them were local residents, while the other 2 bodies have not been identified. Sinaloa State Minister Colonel Cristobal Castaneda said battles for territory between rival drug gangs have intensified in recent weeks.
It was clearly between organized crime groups operating in this area and involved competition between gangs. To give you an idea, from May 29th to the present, we have seized 40 heavy rifles, 5 mini machine guns, 2 Barretts, 10 grenades of different types, 35,612 cartridges, and 24 vehicles in the Tapuche area alone.
14 people have been killed after an armed group raided villages in northwestern Nigeria. Spokesman for the Katsina State Police Command, Gambo Isa, said the group burned down many homes during the attack. Isa said the armed bandits arrived on motorcycles and randomly opened fire on people. Meanwhile, Nigeria's defense ministry says it has destroyed 2 camps of armed gangs in an air raid. It said many gang members were killed and vehicles and ammunition were seized in the operation. The UN Security Council has adopted a resolution to extend the sanctions regime on the Democratic Republic of the Congo till July 2021. Security Council resolutions have imposed an arms embargo on groups in Congo, a travel ban on individuals, and frozen assets of individuals. The resolution won the unanimous support of the 15-member council. It also renews the mandate of the group of experts assisting the Sanctions Committee till August 1st, 2021. The resolution requests the group of experts to submit to the Security Council a midterm report no later than December 30th this year. Malawi's opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera is leading the presidential election rerun with 60% of the votes. State media says the tally is from all but 3 of 28 districts counted. The state broadcaster said President Peter Mutharika is at second position with 39% of the votes. The Electoral Commission said it will take up to 2 more days to announce the official result of the rerun of the May 2019 election. It said they are trying to be as thorough in the count as possible. Earlier on Thursday, the opposition alliance claimed victory for Chakwera. The UNICEF has warned millions of children in Yemen face starvation by the end of the year due to massive shortfall in aid. In its report, UNICEF says the number of malnourished children in the country can jump by 20% to about 2.5 million. UNICEF's Yemen representative Sara Bezolu Neanti said many will die if the agency does not get urgent funding. UNICEF needs nearly $461 million for its humanitarian response, of which only 39% has been funded. The UN says it is unable to keep an inflow of aid as the crisis shows no sign of ending. UK's former Premier Tony Blair says London will have to side with the US on allowing China's Huawei Technologies a role in its 5G network. In an interview, the former Prime Minister said London has to make a call and it should be pro-US in the end. He said one of the issues was that Huawei infrastructure is a lot cheaper than alternatives. Blair said the West should have a relationship with Beijing to deal with international issues like climate change and the global economy. The former Prime Minister said getting into a situation of hostility is not sensible. Earlier, Huawei said it had received planning permission to build a £1 billion research and development facility in England. In Afghanistan, the economic fallout of COVID-19 pandemic has left thousands of people without jobs. To overcome the crisis, the government has hired thousands of jobless workers to rehabilitate groundwater supplies in Kabul. Let's find out more in this report.
The Afghan government has started a water project to cope with the increasing demand in fast-growing Kabul. It uses trenches to capture rainwater and snowmelt, which is usually lost through flash flooding. For this purpose, Afghanistan is recruiting those who have lost their jobs due to the coronavirus-induced lockdown.
The main goal of this project is to control the surface water of the train in the mountains. Once we dig a trench, then we will plant a tree in it to save the water, and so the tree can benefit from the saved water. Also, a lot of people lost their jobs in Kabul due to the spread of coronavirus, so we have hired them to earn a living and to serve the country.
Planned to run for a year, the Kabul Water Project pays laborers at least 300 Afghanis a day to dig close to 150,000 trenches. The wages are modest, but crucial for survival.
This is a tough job, but I have to do it to earn halal food. Also, I take pride in the reconstruction of my country. This is good for the future of our country.
Experts say Kabul's groundwater supplies have been overexploited. A study shows that the city's groundwater levels have decreased by about 1 meter per year over the past 2 decades.
The death toll from lightning strikes and torrential rains in India has risen to 107. Officials say 83 people were killed in Bihar state, while 24 other fatalities were reported in Uttar Pradesh. They said 44 people were injured as high-speed winds and rain felled trees and electricity poles. Officials said the strikes also caused material damage and resulted in the deaths of some 40 animals. An emergency official said the victims were mostly farmers or homeless people. The Weather Bureau has forecast more storms in India for the coming days. Heavy rainfall has affected over 11 million people in more than a dozen provinces in southern and western China. State media says $3.4 billion were lost in direct damages, while 2.1 million acres of farmland was also affected. In a statement, the Flood Control Agency said rainstorms are expected to hit vast stretches of China from today. It highlighted a high risk of flooding, landslides, and urban waterlogging. The Emergency Management Department of Jiangxi says over 37,000 people have been evacuated in 38 counties. China has had over 20 heavy rainstorms this year, the second highest number since 2013. European stock markets are trading higher despite grim economic projections by the IMF and resurgence of COVID-19. Industrial stocks have gained about 1.5%. London's FTSE 100 is trading nearly 1% higher as energy stocks tracked gains in oil prices. CAC 40 in Paris has gained nearly 1% as Air France-KLM stocks surge over 2.5% after the approval of a €3.5 billion rescue deal. Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 0.5% higher. In Asia, Nikkei 225 and Seoul's Kospi gained over 1% each, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index closed nearly 1% lower as shares of Alibaba dropped nearly 3%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained over. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.